Hello and welcome to this video by the Gower Society Youth, funded by the Gower Society. My name's Dawn and I'm going to take you on an exploration of the rocky shore. This is Port Eynon, one of the many beaches we've got on Gower. And what this video is going to show you is the littoral zone. This starts at the lower shore, which is where the sea goes out on the lowest tide, goes on to the middle shore, and then all the way up to the upper shore into the splash zone. We're going to find out what's living in these exciting environments, especially how they're adapted to live in such a harsh environment and how they protect themselves from predators and the elements. One of the commonest crabs that you'll find in the lower shore, and in fact the middle shore, is the shore crab. Now, shore crabs come in lots of different colours, but they mainly are green. And you tell them from edible crabs, not only by their colour, but from the front of their carapace there has got spiky bits. Now, I've got two crabs here. They're both shore crabs, but one is a female, one is a male. So to look at their tails underneath, you can tell by the shape whether it's a female or a male. So this is a female. We've got a broad base to the tail, and it's in kind of like a half circle shape. That's there so that it can contain all of its thousands of eggs that it holds before it releases them into the sea. The male, however, is a triangle with a much narrower base there. Now, if you want to know how to pick up a crab properly, you need to make sure you stay away from those pincers. So if you look behind, on their carapace, or on their back of their shell, they have a gap in between the back legs here. So if you place your fingers there, they won't be able to pinch you. It's like someone trying to pick you up by the very back of your back. Now, if you do pick them up with one finger underneath here, it's very easy for them to pinch you. So when you find a crab, best thing to do is to just put your finger so it squishes its legs down so it can't actually move away. Then you'll see a gap between the spiky bit of the carapace and the back of its carapace. Take your fingers, put it either side, make sure you're nice and firm, and then lift it up. In the lower shore and the middle shore, you'll find lots of sea snails or gastropods. Now, these sea snails vary. They've got a huge variety of colours, but there's also a few different species. If I show you one of the most interesting ones we've got in the lower shore, that's this one here. Now, you can find them in yellow, in white, in black, even stripy, and these are called dog whelks. Now, these are actually predators. Now, if you're not sure if you've got a dog whelk or another sea snail, if you turn it over, you will see this tiny gap going from the inside hole to the outside, and that means it's a dog whelk. They're also white and most of the others are black. Now, this animal is really a ferocious predator. If it finds itself a nice meal like a mussel, most animals can't actually get through that shell, but this one can. What it does is it holds on to the outside and it starts to drill its way through the shell. Now, it's going to take quite a few days for it to do that, but in the meantime, that mussel can't get rid of that dog whelk. When it gets through the shell, it will eat it and then it will leave it behind with a shell with a hole in it. So if you find a shell with a hole in it on the beach, it's probably been eaten by these predatory dog whelks. One of the other shellfish that you'll find in the lower shore is not a gastropod, not a snail, but a bivalve, which means it has two shells. This bivalve is the mussel. Now, mussels stick themselves to the rock by this byssal thread, so they're quite hard, so don't try and pull them off, just leave them where they are. But those two shells clamp so tightly, nothing can get into them. Of course, there is the dog whelk that drills its way through. So have a look for them, but also have a look for those shells with any holes in them. Because the middle shore is exposed to the air for more time than the lower shore, most of the animals that live here have to try and protect themselves from being desiccated or dried out. Now, limpets here do this by squishing against the rock so that they don't let any of that air in and they trap some water there. So if you go up to them and give them a wiggle, they won't move because they're hard against the rock. Do be careful though, because if you knock it off, it's not going to be able to breathe until the tide comes in. When the tide does come in, they will start to graze and they move around the rock, grazing the small little bits of algae that are growing on it. And they always come back to the same spot where they started before the tide goes out again. In the rock pools of the middle shore, or in the cracks in between the rocks, you might find some sea anemones. Now if you find beadlet anemones, they just look like these reddish-brown blobs. But this is actually an animal that when it goes inside the water, tentacles will come out. Now those tentacles have got stinging cells on it, and when a little shrimp or fish swims by, it will fire little harpoons at it. And those stinging cells will actually paralyse the fish, and then the fish will be drawn in with those tentacles and it will start to eat it through its mouth, which is in the centre of the tentacles. Further away from the sea, above the middle shore, we've got the upper shore, and this is a really difficult place to live because the sea only covers this area for about 20% of the time. So the animals or plants living here could be in the air for days and days, maybe even a week. So you have to be really well adapted to be able to survive in the air here, as well as being able to survive when the sea eventually does come in on a high spring tide. One animal you can find in the upper shore is the rough periwinkle. Now, this sea snail, unlike the other sea snails that we saw in the lower shore, can actually breathe in air. And that's a brilliant adaptation to live in the upper shore. The other ones that we found, the periwinkles and also the dog whelks, if they're not in rock pools, they have to trap a bubble of air around the entrance to their shell, their operculum here, and that bubble of air is going to give them enough oxygen to get through the time that they're in the air. So if you pull them off the rocks, they can actually suffocate unless you put them back into a rock pool. So make sure you put back your animals where you found them. Above the upper shore, we've got the splash zone. And in this location, we won't find any marine animals or any seaweed. We do, however, find some lichens. We have black tar lichen and our orange and yellow lichen. Now, this isn't a marine species, and it's because we're actually out of the rocky shore. The rocky shore actually ends when you get to the strand line. Now, strand line is short for stranded. And all of those seaweeds and dead animals that are being washed in when the tide comes in get left behind in this line to show the high tide mark. So anything above that is not actually a marine environment, it's actually a terrestrial environment. So if you actually find any puddles of water up there, chances are it's probably a rain puddle and not seawater at all. I hope you've enjoyed this exploration of one of the rocky shores of Gower. Now, if you'd like to explore some more, if you go on the Gower Society website and look at the youth pages, you'll find some identification guides for rock pooling. And just remember, Gower Society youth activities are happening all the time, every month, and we quite often go rock pooling. So we hope to see you at an activity soon.